Hello, and thank you for picking up on this YouTube presentation. My name is Stephen Bishop. I put some material together which has emerged in this book entitled Something More, Miracles in the Bible and Their Impact on Us. And on this occasion I want to read a chapter recorded in John's Gospel, chapter 4, in the ministry of Jesus. The chapter is headed Trusting Despite the Crisis. And the opening verse is, "The man took Jesus at his word." Crisis. This is a word with various connotations, many of them negative, like having fear, being overwhelmed and out of control. It also has the element of being both unavoidable and uninvited, with inevitable adverse outcomes. The recent pandemic constituted a series of crises for many people which impacted them in different ways, physically, mentally, financially and spiritually. For the royal official described in John chapter 4, the negative elements of a crisis were very much in evidence. He was faced with the declining health of his son, who was close to death. The steps that he took which led to Jesus' miraculous intervention are ones which we also can take when gripped by crisis. Calling out to Jesus. The father's desperate situation regarding his son caused him to take drastic action. He travelled over hilly terrain by foot, a distance of around 16 miles from his home in Capernaum to Cana in Galilee. Although having status, connections and a position of authority in his community, none of these helped him to cope with his son's condition. The helpless and hopeless position which confronted him not only drove him to undertake a difficult day's journey, but he approached Jesus with nothing to offer in return for his intervention. He begged him to come and heal his son. He was calling out to Jesus purely on the basis of the mercy and power which the Father believed was part of Jesus' nature. The psalmist was someone else who recognised that in a crisis, God was the only one to whom he could go. Psalm 142. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. Before him I tell my trouble. There is a cost in calling out like this. All pretence at our own ability and ingenuity to deal with a crisis has to go. We have to be real with ourselves and with others that we are helpless and can only come to God. This was the experience of 33 miners in Chile in 2010, trapped deep underground, out of touch with those on the surface following an explosion in the mine's working chamber. But they could call out to God, a step initiated by Jose Enrique, one of the miners who was a committed Christian. God intervened in this crisis in response to their prayers, enabling contact to be established with the rescuers on the surface, and a borehole then engineered through which all the miners were eventually brought to safety on a specially designed capsule. Continued focus on Jesus. The response from Jesus to the official's plea for help did not seem positive. His words did not address the crisis and appeared to constitute a rebuke. Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe. However, Jesus was actually highlighting a perspective which was intended to encourage trust in him. Regardless of whether or not signs and wonders were evident, Jesus was pointing out that he was still one in whom trust could be placed. The Father grasped the point. His faith was not based on outward indicators. He continued to focus on Jesus and repeated his request, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Persistence in this way, even in the face of seeming or actual discouragement, is a consistent factor if we want to experience something more of God's intervention in our lives. Convinced that there is something more. But what marked out the Father's response to Jesus was his conviction. Jesus' response to the Father's continued plea for intervention was a simple declaration. Go, your son will live. On the basis of these words alone, no signs and wonders or any other indicator to back them up, the Father departed. He took Jesus at his word. He kept trusting in the words of Jesus throughout his entire journey home, which again took time. It meant that only on the following day did he find out that his son had recovered. His servants met him with the news, and he asked when the recovery had taken place. Upon being told that it was 1 in the afternoon of the previous day, the father realised that this was the exact time that Jesus had made the declaration of healing. This realisation resulted in the official and his whole household putting their trust in Jesus. In recent times, a small group of Christians involved in printing and posting out evangelical and Bible teaching material overseas also needed to take Jesus at his word. The printing mission had operated out of a church hall in East London and had annually produced around 1 million pieces of literature. But it was a low-profile operation with no advertising or canvassing for funds. It was believed that God had said that he would provide the needed finance in response to prayer. So on this basis, an order was placed on one occasion for a further supply of paper, even though there was a crisis. No money was in the bank account to pay for it. Even after the paper was delivered and an invoice received, there was still insufficient funds to meet the cost of the material. However, a cheque was posted to the supplier, trusting that God would work to provide the money. Unbeknown to the team, various unsolicited and voluntary donations were on their way to the mission, which enabled sufficient funds to be in the account when the cheque was eventually presented. In what situation does Jesus want you to take him at his word? I hope this is a help to you. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you in your walk with him. Goodbye.